Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL main stage week number 5 overview and analysis video. Some of you might be wondering, didn't we just get a weekly review 2 days ago on this channel? 3 days ago, I think it technically is at this point by the time you're seeing this. Yes, as absolutely the case. We just got the week 4 review. How can we already be through another week? Well, of course, this is the final week of the LPL regular season, if you will. Most of the teams, I think all of the teams have officially locked themselves into either the playoffs or the play-ins or out of the playoffs. Everything is determined, but this being the final week of the regular season, it was of course shortened, only 3 days, and this is going to illuminate exactly where these teams are going to land. The seeding will be determined at the end of this. We will of course lightly be going over what I'm expecting and anticipating from some of the teams, but tomorrow, as this video is going up, we're going to have a much longer playoff preview, including all of the play-in series, including all of the teams in the playoffs, my yearly awards, and so that's all going to be on the channel tomorrow, but today we're going to be covering the final 6 series in the regular season for the LPL in 2024. So if you're excited, let me know down in the comment section below. If you want to know my thoughts on everything up until this point, check out the playlist up in the iCard. That's the LPL playlist for the summer split. It's going to have everything from the qualification stage to everything that's happened here in the main stage, and of course that will continue to be updated once we start going through the playoffs. So without further ado, let's get right into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I would normally say that I'm going to update my power rankings, but I'm going to keep them a little bit secret at the end of this video because we do have an entire playoffs video to do some predictions in. I don't want to spoil where I think these teams are going to land at the end of this one. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. There's a lot of fun stuff to talk about here just in terms of overall outcome, and honestly, there were some consequential games. Basically everything was still up for grabs, I mean, except for the actual spots in the playoffs, but in terms of seeding, you know, teams could move up or down quite a bit this week, so a lot to play for, and that starts off on day number 1 with a Group Nirvana matchup between Thunder Talk Gaming and RNG. Thunder Talk is pretty predictably going to pick up the 2-0 here, but this is actually really big for them. This puts them in a really solid spot at 11-4 in terms of their game score, basically regardless of what happens in the OMG RA series later on in the week. Thunder Talk's very likely to get that number 2 seed. This is pretty good. It means that they are going to face someone else from Group Nirvana, likely whoever wins that OMG RA series, and that is a good position to be in. Both of those teams are okay, but not great, right? Like, they're not, you know, it's not the same as facing, you know, predictably one of the teams from Group Ascend that are likely going to be favorites in their own series. You're facing somebody else who did struggle at least a little bit at the beginning part of the split. So this is a pretty important win for RNG. This obviously meant nothing. They were already the worst team in the league. They had already been eliminated. What this does show is that they're dropping to 1-6. I know that there are a lot of rumors floating around right now as to what might happen to RNG next year, but we'll talk about that when we get to them. Player of the series is very obviously gonna go to Beishwan, who was awesome in the jungle. One thing that I really want to point out is I'm loving the resurgence of Shyvana in the jungle right now. She fits the meta incredibly well. We're seeing all these AP scaling carries in the jungle, things like Karthus, you know, things even like Talia that we've seen in the past, but, you know, Lilia has been a big pick here in the LPL. A lot of these AP bruisers, I mean, Nidalee's obviously a big pick, but a lot of these AP bruisers are becoming a little bit more, you know, consistent, and that's exactly where Shyvana will fit. If the games are going long, and if you can get her to the point where she can scale into the late game, she's going to do 1 billion damage if you build her full AP. So, you know, it's exciting to see her come back into the meta. We've seen her a couple of times top lane for Ninjas in Pyjamas because of Shanji, but I think it should be gaining some popularity in the jungle, and we've been seeing that in a lot of different regions. So, nice to see that, and Beishwan piloted it great. Quite frankly, he's been awesome over summer. You know, people are rightfully going to criticize his spring split because it was kind of horrible. There really isn't a lot to like about the way he played spring. It felt like even though he had decent macro decisions, his mechanics were just so much further behind everybody else in the league at that point that he was just struggling to be able to keep up in the early game. But things really course corrected. This is the Beishwan that kind of became a channel darling for me over the course of 2022 and 2023, where I was like, this guy just facilitates and initiates a game to make it as easy as possible for players like UCal and 1xN to go and do their jobs. That's kind of what we saw from Beishwan. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders, and so long as he's in a meta where he doesn't have to like completely mechanically outplay some other players, he's gonna look really good. I think obviously Group Nirvana definitely helps with that. His lack of mechanical skill isn't as punishable by these other junglers that are, you know, kind of towards the bottom of the jungle rankings, we'll just say, but, you know, I don't think he would do quite as well if he was going into Kanavi, let's just say. That might be a, you know, a bigger step and a bigger problem, but he's the kind of player that I think can absolutely destroy, you know, inexperienced junglers, and that's exactly what happened here. So credit to Beishwan. UCal and 1xN continue to look really solid. Feather and Hoya were pretty good in this series as well. Generally, ThunderTalk has been on the up over the last few weeks, and, you know, that's reflected in my power rankings. I've moved them up to number 11. They're above LGD, who's in Group Ascend. I don't think a lot of people are going to necessarily disagree with that. I think ThunderTalk has more upside in terms of like a complete package right now, especially because Hoya and Feather have been playing better as of late. You know, for a lot of this split, it felt like, well, UCal either wins or loses this team games. 1xN can do some interesting things. Beishwan's playing relatively okay, but Hoya was an anchor in the top lane. Feather, in my opinion, wasn't particularly connected with the rest of this team, even if he was making some individually interesting plays. It seems like things have gotten better over the course of this split, which is just what you have to be excited for as a ThunderTalk fan. And then for RNG, there's just not really a lot to talk about. This team is really bad in its current iteration. I do think this is the best version of this roster with XZZ in the mid lane and Tong Yuan at support. I do think that this is probably the most consistent way to play the game, if only because XZZ actually seems like he is an interesting player, but RNG just basically has nothing on this roster that is going to allow them to be anything other than garbage. Huanfeng is a good player, and it sucks that going against his former team, the one that kept him on the bench for so many years, did not end up in a win, especially because he still played very well. This guy was awesome all split for RNG, and it just never mattered. He never had a support. He never had a team. You know, it's just an unfortunate situation for him. I still think he can perform like a top tier 80 carry at this level, but the rest of this team is garbage. Geju is going to get dud of the series. He's gotten 4 of these in like the 3 weeks that he's played. Geju's bad. Like, I don't really know what to say. It's really funny that, you know, he goes on his stream and complains about not getting player of the game performances, because I think, you know, pound for pound, when you're talking about just pure game time, he's probably been the worst jungler in the entire league. I can't think of anybody who more consistently loses than him, and I think what this really has spotlighted is that Wei's resurgence on BLG should have been more anticipated, because with Geju coming in, it's becoming increasingly clearer that Wei was a miracle worker for even playing average on this team. Even slightly below average was probably a miracle decision, because Geju was come in and just been unplayable for this roster. So, you know, playing jungle for RNG is not easy when every single lane is losing, but Geju continues to make it look even harder. Tong Yuan's also just not a good player. At some point, they're going to have to bench him. He's a bad support. He's a bad mid laner. He's just not good. He's not a good LPL player, and I don't know when this team is going to give up on that experiment, but it should be soon. XZZ interested me in the first couple series that he played. He was probably at his worst here. Juice didn't really do anything, although he was relatively interesting. Like, Hoya's not the best laner, and Juice was able to take advantage of that. There have been flashes for him, but he's not been consistent at all. It's just hard to get a read on RNG, and I think more specifically, you know, is this team going to be in the league next year? I said there have been rumors, there's been rumblings that this could potentially be one of the spots that gets sold in the offseason. RNG might not have the financial desire to back the LPL anymore. I would be shocked if that ends up being the case. There are other major organizations that I would expect to sell out first, mostly Invictus Gaming. That seems kind of the direction that they're going in, but RNG I would expect to be back in the league next year, and hopefully it's something better, because the legacy of RNG does not deserve whatever this roster was. And then for ThunderTalk on the other side, this is a nice win, and it does put you in a good spot, but, you know, we're going to talk about it once we get to that OMG RA series. With how the bottom of Group Ascend looks right now, maybe finishing like 3rd or 4th in Group Nirvana actually is a good thing. Getting to play LGD over OMG might actually be a good thing, so we'll end up seeing if this win actually comes back to bite ThunderTalk in terms of their opponent, but at least for now, this team is actually looking very good. And then moving on to our second series of day 1, and it's the one we were just talking a lot about. This will determine the team that ends up getting the number 1 seed here in Group Nirvana. It's Rare Atom taking on OMG. And OMG does pick up the 2-0 series win. They definitely were the better team in this one, and they came out and performed like it. They really showed that this is not a fluke, that this 6-1 record that they are going to be coming out of this group with is a lot more indicative of their actual skill level than, you know, anything that happened before that, than all of the downplaying that they did in the qualification stage. So credit to OMG, they played great, but as I said in the previous section, Is it really all that good to get the number 1 seed here? Like, for me, seeds 3 and 4 are like the hottest commodities in the entire Group Nirvana at the current moment, because it means you get to play LGD and Ninjas in Pyjamas in a best of 5, and both of those teams look like absolute disasters. Specifically the 3rd seed, because it means you're playing whatever team ends up going winless, whoever loses the matchup this week, and that's a pretty good advantage mentally to have if you're a team sitting at, 5 and 2 that doesn't necessarily feel all that bad about how they played in Group Nirvana. If you're going into that matchup against a team that's just gone like, what, 0 and 8 across an entire group stage, yeah, you're going to have a bit of a mental confidence advantage there. So I don't think it's all that bad for Rare Atom to have lost this. It's not bad for OMG to have won this, certainly not. It does prove that they are the best team in the group, at least for now, but they might have a harder matchup in the play-in stage than a team like Rare Atom does, simply because of this victory. So we'll go ahead and talk about this series in and of itself. Player of the series for me is going to go to Starry. This one was really easy. Starry has completely emerged for this team as one of the more interesting pieces that they have. I'm willing to take the L on this take. I did not see it in Starry. Watching his LDL tape, there really just wasn't a lot there to excite me. I was very shocked that they would end up choosing him over Abel. Very different players. Starry is not the kind of guy that's going to go out there and like get his own advantages, flip games 50-50. Abel is a very feast or famine player, and that's just something that clearly OMG didn't want to deal with anymore. So they brought Starry in as somebody who is going to be better within the structure of a team that doesn't need as many resources early, that isn't going to lose as hard when he does lose, even if he's not quite as mechanically talented. And things really have ended up working out. It's allowed this team to play through other avenues, and I think, obviously bringing Tianjin in has also helped a lot, but Starry's emergence is the number 1 reason why this team is sitting at 6-1. If it had just been Tianjin coming in and being, kind of flippy in his own right in the jungle position and Angel performing a lot better, if those were the only 2 changes that this team made, they probably would be a play-ins team. They probably wouldn't be 6-1 in the number 1 team in Group Nirvana. So, big ups to Starry. I'm sure a lot of people are going to give credit to PP God, and I do think he probably deserves it for stuff that we're not seeing on the Rift, but, his on the Rift performances, they've gotten better for sure. They've just not really been all that good over the course of this year, so I don't want to sit here and say that his entire game has become a lot easier because he's playing with PP God. Again, perhaps the mentorship and the, just general vibes that he's able to curate as somebody who has been known to help out younger AD carries, most notably Photic in the past. What he brings to the table in that regard is probably very positive, and I'm sure has helped Starry, kind of grow over the course of this split and not stagnate and keep his mental up. But in terms of, on the Rift performance, which is really all I can judge, it's all I can see. I'm not in the locker room. PP God's been fine. He's been one of the more mediocre supports here in Group Nirvana. Angel was awesome here. Angel continues to be on that upward trajectory, definitely the better of these 2 mid laners. He is the most important player to OMG. At the end of the day, he is the driving force for what they want to do in the mid game, and so if he's playing well, they're going to be just fine. Harry had his best series ever here. Like, I can't remember the last time he actually played well, like this, you know what I mean? I can't remember the last time he actually just went up against a decent player in Xiaoshu, who, yes, is pretty flippy, but, is a good player and just kind of beats him down. Really great series from Harry. One of the better top lane series we've seen from anyone in Group Nirvana. It's just not been consistent at all for him. He's kind of been a negative for this team. And Tianjin, again, he's very feast or famine. He's going to dive in there on the Vi. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not, but, his added aggression has added a layer to this team that they just didn't have before he got here. So OMG's in a really good spot, even if I do think that RA is also in a good spot because of this loss. I know they're not going to feel great because they got O2'd and their macro problems are becoming more and more apparent. They just don't play the map very well, even if they are mechanically talented. But again, they might even have a better and easier opponent to get into the actual playoffs with because of this loss. I will talk about this series though. Dud of the series is going to go to Vikla in the mid lane. I've been pretty complimentary of Vikla over the course of this split. I think he's been pretty good for RA. Certainly has been significantly better than he was in spring. Kind of a similar arc as what we just talked about with Beishuan for Thunder Talk, where he was rightfully receiving quite a bit of criticism in spring, but he was getting better over the course of the spring split. By the end of spring, he was significantly more consistent. And then in summer, he's honestly just been good for this team. His lane stats are great. And, he actively adds a lot of pressure to the middle of the map that makes like Xiao Hao and assumes life a lot easier. So he's been good. Lucian is not the pick for him. He is clearly not very comfortable on this champion. He's playing it as if it's Tristana, and it's not. Like, they play very differently. He's way too aggressive. It doesn't really seem like he's comfortable trying to, deal the maximum amount of damage in these fights on Lucian as a champion. champion, and so I think he just needs to be moved to something else. I don't think it's a player problem. I think it's just clearly that he is not very good on this champion. But I think the rest of RA was generally, up and down as well. Xiao Hao had one of his weaker series in a while. He has been such a staple driving force for this team that seeing him underperform is definitely a bit disappointing. Xiaoshu was not very good in the top lane. We already talked about that. When you're getting outplayed by Harry, that's not a great spot to be in. Asum and Jue were generally fine. They certainly weren't the problem here, but Starry and PP God completely outclassed them in terms of the bot lane 2v2. RA just wasn't as good as OMG in this series. That was very clear. But hopefully this loss can spark something in them that makes it a little bit easier for them to qualify for the playoffs, because they absolutely have that kind of upside. But OMG clearly is the best team in Group Nirvana. The emergence of their young players is very cool to see, and I'm really happy to have been wrong about this team. And then moving on now to day number 2, and this was the matchup that I think a lot of people were looking at, circling their calendars for in week number 2, but not for the right reasons. It's the 0-7 clash here in Group Ascend. Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on LGD Gaming. And LGD Gaming ends up picking up the 2-1 series win. They've done it. They've picked up a win in Group Ascend. I didn't think this was going to happen. I thought Ninjas in Pyjamas were going to come out and prove that, they might be really bad and really uncoordinated against actual good teams, but they should at the very least be able to beat an LGD roster that is significantly weaker than them. But that's not even the case. Everything that is going wrong for Ninjas in Pyjamas was just compounded tenfold in this series. They're coming out of Group Ascend 0-8. They're coming out of the group 3-16 in terms of game score, and they just lost to LGD, who should have been the freest win for every single person in this group. Congrats to LGD. I feel good that they won this. I don't think it really matters in the grand scheme of things, and in fact, it certainly does make things a bit more interesting, because as the number, 8 seed now technically in Group Ascend, they end up playing the number 4 seed of Group Nirvana. That matchup all of a sudden becomes a lot more interesting. I think LGD is probably the easiest team to beat in a best of 5 right now, so, we'll end up seeing how that ends up going, but congrats to this team. Player of the series is going to go to Xiaoya in the bot lane. This was a really easy choice. He was awesome in this series, and I've gone on record saying that I think this team is dumb for playing Kepler really at all across this year. I thought that it was pretty ridiculous, not because Xiaoya is some unbelievable, can't miss AD carry prospect. I don't think that that's the case, but Xiaoya has at least shown something. Like, Kepler has not only been a disaster here in the LPL, but as I stated at the beginning of this year, last year in the LDL, he was really bad. He was one of the worst AD carries that I watched in the LDL last year, let alone, players that got promoted. So, Xiaoya was certainly someone that I trusted more. And at least for now, that trust seemingly is paying off. He was really good in this series, specifically on the Ezreal in game number 3, where he was excellent. They did a great job of trying to get him online, but he was still good on the Kai'Sa in game 2, just maybe a tad bit overshadowed by his really good mid laner in Haichao, who is the guy on LGD Gaming. At this point, it's crazy the turnaround that I've done on Haichao just in the span of 1 year. He has gone from a player that at the start of this year, when you go back and look at my, January preseason rankings for the LPL, I had him as the last ranked mid laner in the entire league. I thought that he had proven at this point that he was going to be almost like a Karis type player if you're following the LCK, a player that is continuously getting opportunities but has really never shown anything other than the hope that one day he might be good at the top level, and at some point you just have to say that that hope is never going to be realized in its entirety. But this was the year that Haichao really had it all click, and quite frankly, he's been like a borderline top 6 or 7 mid laner in the entire LPL. He has been amazing, and he's the reason LGD is in Group Ascend in the first place, let alone the reason that they had any chance in this series. If he was bad, Rookie would have taken advantage of him. Say what you will about Rookie, but he's been able to beat up on the bad mid laners really well over the course of this year. He didn't get a chance to do that here in Group Ascend because obviously there aren't bad mid laners in Group Ascend, but Haichao proved that he is a part of that upper echelon, which is really good. Also, credit to Jinzhao, who finally had a good series. This is the first time in Group Ascend that he didn't look completely and utterly outclassed. He's been getting dud of the week. Week after week, he's gotten 2 in a row for the LPL here. He's been the worst player in the LPL so far in the main stage. Obviously, he does not deserve to be in Group Ascend. This was not something that I think this team was anticipating having to go through when they got, Jinzhao, when they kept him on the roster, but he finally had a series where he looked relatively competent at being able to enable his AD carry to win the game. So credit to him. Bertle was fine. Meteor was pretty good. Definitely the better jungler here. We'll talk about the roster sub for Nip, but, you know, LGD looked solid, and honestly, maybe don't count this team out of being able to win a best of 5, especially now that they are the #1 team, you know, in that stage, in the play-in stage. They are going to have the easiest opponent in Invictus Gaming, which we will talk about later. That is a very winnable series for them, so we'll see how things end up going, but for Ninjas in Pyjamas, this is a disaster. This is the most tragic loss that you have suffered all year long, and I don't even think that it's that close. 0-7 obviously sucked, but on the horizon, you had the easiest matchup, and at the very least, you felt like you were going to be walking out of this group with 1 win. Not even that. You know, 0-8 is a disaster, and even with the roster change, Aki is out, Leon is in. This had been announced. He obviously had to serve his 2-game suspension from the incident earlier this year that I'm not going to get into here because it's wild, but he came in here, and Leon's kind of known for joining a team mid-season and kind of reinvigorating them, figuring things out, and at least being the spark plug that can get them rolling again, even if that success hasn't always been sustainable for him individually as a player. But he was awful in the series. He's going to get dud of the series. I think a lot of people are going to want to see Shanji get this, and trust me, I get it. Games 2 and 3, he was the worst player on the Rift, and it wasn't even remotely close. He was awful in games 2 and 3, but he was the best player in game #1. Their only win here was off the back of them being able to play through the Rumble. I just can't reasonably give dud of the series to somebody who was the driving force for a win in a series. It's just really hard to justify that for me, and so I'm going to go for the player who was the least consistent throughout all 3 games, and that is definitely Leon. You saw a lot of people talking about how Leon was going to come in and completely change the culture of this team, and that Aki obviously was just awful. Obviously, this is the first series that Shanji has ever played without Aki, at least at the LPL level. There were so many storylines, and unfortunately, maybe we gave Aki a pretty bad rap because Leon's job was not easy here. It turns out that playing jungle for Ninjas in Pyjamas is really tough when a lot of things are going wrong. Your bot lane is not even good at laning into Xiaoya and Jinjiao, who have been a disaster. Rookie has just completely turned into a 1v1 flip machine where, you know, he's going to get some resources and he's going to give over a ton of resources as well. Shanji was awful in the back half of this series. It's a lot harder to play jungle for Ninjas in Pyjamas than it is for other teams, and Leon, I think, experienced that. Hopefully, he can get more, integrated to this roster as they play more games, but he doesn't have a ton of time to get prepared for that. It's a best of 5 up next, and so he's got to be ready now, but disaster for Ninjas in Pyjamas, and really, really good stuff from LGD. You got to be happy for them, even if I'm not exactly sure it means a lot. Honestly, it might mean something. If they get an easier opponent now because of this win for the best of 5 stage, this series could be the difference between making and missing playoffs. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it's the first of the final 2 for the #1 team in the region. It's Bilibili Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend, and at least in their first test, they do end up passing. Their split can go in a lot of different directions. Their finish can go in a lot of different directions depending on how this week goes. They're really the only team with major potential to move like up or down a lot because they have 2 games back-to-back on back-to-back days. I think everybody assumed that they would be going far in the Esports World Cup, and so they were scheduled to play most of their games at the end of the split. It does make sense, but, you know, Top Esports was the one who kind of suffered for that at the end of the day. But regardless, Bilibili looking very good, and they've really locked in this starting 5. I think it's really become something that's been a lot more comfortable for them. Wei, I think, has come in and stabilized and, quite frankly, changed the team a lot. This team plays almost exactly different to what they were, the opposite of what they were at the beginning of the split. Instead of being this super aggressive, very fast-paced, high-energy team that wants to try to end games quickly like they were last year, and like they carried into this year with essentially just an upgrade in the mid lane with Knight, they have almost completely flipped into being a very slow, methodical team in terms of just trying to take macro advantages through Wei. Obviously, jungle has a lot of, I guess, priority in terms of decision-making and tempo on the game, and Wei has clearly come in and said, nope, we're slowing it down. We are not going to be nearly as aggressive. That could be good, could be bad. We'll just have to wait and see. It's certainly going to be a lot more visible during the playoffs, but at least for now, it's looking pretty good because Wei is looking really good. He's going to get player of the series. It's almost the exact opposite of like the LNG situation where you had a jungler in Wei. Very funny how that ends up working out, who really needed to adapt to the rest of his team in order for that team to end up working. Wei had to take kind of a cut in terms of the resources that he was getting and just completely change his style to fit, Scout and Gala and make sure that they were all comfortable. Wei has done the opposite. He's come into the team and he said, like, okay, well, you guys are all comfortable playing a lot of different styles and you're all really good players. Play around me. Like, let's see if we can get me in a good spot, and then I can translate that to the rest of you. And it's really worked for Bilibili. I'm not saying that in like a negative way. That wasn't meant to be any sort of diss. I think it's a good idea for a player who might not be as comfortable playing with the rest of his teammates to be the one that they end up enabling, because his job ends up becoming the easiest of the entire team in that front. So I think Wei is doing a good job of accepting those resources and piloting the Sejuani as kind of that focal point in the early game like he is known to do. The Lilia was also very good in game number 3, but Wei, again, has made this team better, even if they are definitely a bit different. I also tweeted this out, but man, poor Shun. Like, the guy has gone to back-to-back MSI finals. He finished top 4 at Worlds last year. He just won the LPL, and he's benched. He's probably not going to play again for the rest of the year. I don't know anybody who's ever had that resume who has had this happen to them. If you can remember any comparable situation, let me know, but it is like a true disaster for someone like Shun to not be playing and not even have a chance to try to qualify for Worlds. It's genuinely absurd, but, you know, just a little bit of an aside. It's certainly no negative connotation on Wei, who has come in and played well. Knight was really good outside of the Yone game in game 2, where he got completely clapped by Shanks. We'll talk about him in a minute. Elk on Bin, they were all very good here. Elk typically very good this split. Again, he's an MVP frontrunner for me. I think he should be for basically everyone, but BLG looking good, and 6-1 is a good record. And then for AL, you know, some good and some bad. I think game 2 actually was very promising. The fact that you could go toe-to-toe in terms of aggressive moves with Bilibili and actually just come out on top, for Shanks to be able to step up, that's a really good sign. You know, game 2 was a really good look. Now, games 1 and 3, definitely not as good. They were the more dominant games of this series, and Shanks continues to show his inconsistencies because he was really bad in the first and third game, even if he was really good in game 2, and that's always been his biggest individual problem, is that game to game, he's not exactly the most consistent mid laner in the world, and you kind of need to be that to be considered one of the best, even if your best games are as good as Shanks' best games. Even if you can go out and outplay Knight for one important game, it just doesn't really matter if you can't do it multiple times. That's kind of the determining factor as to whether or not you can be considered elite or not in my brain. But it certainly wasn't his fault that they lost this series. To me, top and bot are clear, like in terms of pointing out the weaknesses. Kale is going to get dud of the series here. Just didn't do anything. The Bard in game 1 was useless. The Maokai in game 3 was useless. He just wasn't active on the map. He played really passive and really safe, and that played exactly into how BLG wanted to operate. That might be a little bit counterintuitive if they were scouting BLG from earlier on in the split, but they should know that with Wei, they play slower, and you can't really get away with the way that Kale was playing in this series. So not ideal from him. I think Krako continues to kind of underperform. He's kind of in the same boat as Shanks for me, where, you know, his good games are so good, but his bad games are so bad. I think Shanks is more talented individually, but Krako is a very good player when everything is working. You know, somebody who can be an all-pro caliber LPL jungler. It's just not working right now, and things have definitely fallen off since getting to Group Ascend. Ale was very finicky here. The Corki top in game 1 did not work. I almost gave him dud of the series just for picking Corki top, but it did not work out into the Kennen. It ended up not working. I understand it's a marksman meta, and you just want to get as many of these on the team as you possibly can, but this is not the way to do it. In my opinion, I think this was a pretty horrible draft pick, and he was really bad on the Jax in game 3 as well. He needed to be a lot safer and was consistently getting caught in a lot of bad situations. And so AL just definitely looking worse week after week, but we say that, and they have 5 losses, and 4 of them are to the clear top 4 teams in the league. Like, I'm not going to try to sit here and panic and say that this team is doomed, but they have definitely fallen off from being a team that I expected to go to Worlds to now just being another of the pack. And for Bilibili, you know, they are more than just the pack, obviously. They're sitting at 6-1. This is not the last time we will talk about them. We're going to talk about them in just a second, but this was a good win to kind of start off their final week. But that's going to bring us to our third day of the week and our final day of the LPL regular season. I'm excited to see it closed out, and we get a fun series to kick it off. It's FunPlus Phoenix taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG, just like in the series we just talked about, is going to pick up yet another victory. They moved to 7-1. It's a 2-0. They are at 15-7. They're your number 1 seed, as they probably should be, as was anticipated. This team does end up grabbing that number 1 seed going into playoffs, and that's nice to have. The difference between 1 and 2 actually is pretty big, considering the fact that LNG is the other team in the upper section, not Top Esports, not JD Gaming. To get to avoid whichever one of those teams ends up being better, that's a pretty good place to be. The number 1 seed is definitely more advantageous right now than it has been in the last couple of years. And so, you know, if there's 3 top teams, maybe even 4 top teams, it's really nice to not have to play the strongest one, which I think is the nice position that BLG has put themselves in. But that's not what people are talking about from this series. People are talking about game number 2, rightfully so, because I'm just going to come out and say it, Knight's player of the series. There's not going to be a lot of waffling about this. he breaks the single game kill record in the LPL regular season, going 21-0-4 on the Lucian in game number 2. This is genuinely absurd. Like, there's nothing I can say analysis-wise. Knight is always capable of doing this. He is one of the best players in Chinese League of Legends history, and he continues to prove it. I get that this split hasn't exactly been his best, but if this is your down split, like, the last 3 to 4 weeks have been unbelievably good from him. Like, he has been awesome. He had that weird game number 2 on the Yone, but he was still very good in the previous series, and here he dismantled Care. He made this matchup look completely unplayable for him. Good guy Care ended up donating the pentakill at the end of the game to get him to 21 and get him over the record. Obviously, that's awesome from Care, and, you know, I'm happy for Knight. He's more than earned having that record on his resume. You know, just another thing to add to it, but, you know, there was no other choice. I mean, this guy was always going to win player of the series here. It was never going to be in doubt. That's not to say the rest of the team didn't play well. Bin was awesome in this series, and honestly, he's kind of gone under the radar on this channel. Like, I don't think I've brought him up as much as I probably should have. He was, I would say, a bit more impactful and noticeable in the qualification stage because he was really the only one that was being consistent outside of Elk for this team, but he has continued to stay awesome, and the rest of the team has finally started to catch up to Bin, so I really wanted to give him a shout out here because he's probably been the best top laner in the LPL just in terms of performances in the regular season. Wei has very much stabilized this team. It's becoming clearer and clearer that he is the primary shot caller for them, that he came in and essentially was like, I'm going to be the one making the decisions. It's a big reason why I think this team has slowed down a ton. I say that, but, you know, game 2 was 22 minutes. You know, game 1... definitely much more of the, let's slow the pace down. It doesn't matter if we lose early. We're going to be able to recover and try to win late. Like, that's Wei. That's always kind of been the way that he has played the game. He's never really been all that aggressive in the early game. And so, you know, to see this team slow down the pace, I still worry about that in the long term in terms of facing some of the better teams in the world. But for now, obviously, it's not a problem. And Wei has definitely been better than Shun. I just feel really bad for Shun because there's absolutely no reason that he should be benched. He is a top, you know, I don't know, 5 to 10 jungler in the world. And you know, he's on the bench right now. It's pretty ridiculous, but Elkanon continue to look great. People are going to be surprised at how highly I rank Elk when we get into, like, the awards ceremonies. It certainly might take some people off guard, but he has been unbelievable. Maybe the best player in the LPL this split. I haven't decided who my MVP is yet. And then for FPX on the other side, you know, they are who they are. Like, 3-5 is the expected finish here. I think, you know, this team beat the teams they were supposed to. They beat LGD. They beat Ninjas in Pyjamas. They overperformed in some series. They were relatively competitive, but they're not some superstar team. They are kind of a bar type of team, and this is what they were in spring as well. They're the exact same team that they were in spring. It's just that the LPL is a little bit better right now. They're going to be able to take care of business against teams that they can just out-mechanic. Dectum and Life are a relatively good bot lane in the late game. If they can survive early, they're usually fine. Milky Way is great at playing against junglers that he is better than, not so good at playing against junglers that are as good as he is. You know, pretty typical, you know, LPL jungle rookie kind of player. Care and ZDZ continue to be relative weaknesses. Care has stabilized a little bit, but this series is not a good example of that. ZDZ, obviously not a high priority for this team on the top side. He has just been whatever. He's basically been the exact same player as Xiao Laohu, if not a little bit worse, but done of the series, at least in this one, is going to go to Life. Was just donating so much gold over to BLG. You know, the classic Life Rumble support didn't quite work out in this one as well as it did in a lot of the spring split, but this bot lane should be fine. I'm not super concerned about their projections against teams that are around them in terms of skill level. I think Bilibili was just out to prove a point today, and you can basically throw all of game 2 out. Like, there is almost no tape to actually be able to assess there for FPX because they lost so early and it was so concrete that there's just no way to play out that game. That's one of those that if it happens in scrims at 10 minutes, you're like, FF, go next. Like, there's just nothing else to do. So for FPX, I'm not worried. This is exactly who I thought they would be, but it doesn't exactly give me hope that their upside is higher than I expect it to be. And then for Bilibili, this is the best team in the LPL. I think they proved that over the course of this week, and they will be your favorites to go and win another championship back-to-back. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week and our final series of the regular season here, and we're going out with a bang. A top versus top team matchup. Top Esports taking on JD Gaming. And Top Esports is going to pick up the 2-0 series win, really justifying my stance in putting them back into the top 2 last week. This team has just been on fire ever since getting back into the groove after the Esports World Cup. They came back and they were, you know, obviously a little bit shaky, kind of expectingly a little bit shaky, and they just recovered really fast. After that 0-2 start, they have essentially been untouchable since then. I don't think they've lost a game. I think they are actually genuinely 13-0 in their last 13 games, or 12-0, I should say, in their last 6 series, which is absurd. I mean, it's a ridiculous record, and this team actually right now is maybe looking like the best in the LPL. Like, Bilibili is incredibly strong, but are we sure that Top Esports isn't the most dominant team? I mean, BLG has looked at least a little bit shaky in some of their series. Top Esports has just not done that ever since they've gotten on the same page, and a lot of these players are playing at their best right now. We'll get into that, but a player who honestly has not been at his best and has not really been all that good this split is going to get player of the series, 369 in the top lane. This dude was absolutely massacring people in spring, was easily, in my opinion, the best top laner in the world in the regular season in the spring split. I don't even think it was all that close. The dude was actively just carrying game after game after game for Top Esports, ended up dragging them to top 2. Eventually, the rest of the team ended up catching up. Mako was obviously great. Jackie Love was great. Tian and Cream ended up getting a lot more comfortable, and things worked out for them to get to the finals, but it's not been the case in summer, especially the last couple of weeks, where 369 has quite frankly just not been very good, and I was a bit concerned about this matchup for TES because the last time these two teams played, Sheer actually played, or at least the last time these two players played into each other, Sheer was awesome into 369. That was kind of his coming out party in like his second or third series as a pro. He ended up going into 369 and quite frankly just bodying him in the laning phase in the spring split. So I was interested to see if that was something that was going to carry over here. It did not. 369 was ready for revenge. That game 1 Rumble, devastating. The game 2 Renekton, dominating. I mean, the early lead that he was able to generate was ridiculous. He was just awesome in this series. Very easy choice for player of the series as a whole. But man, do I have to give a shout out to both Tian and Cream. Are they the best mid-jungle duo in the LPL? Like, there's a real conversation to have about that. Tian is without a doubt one of the top 3 junglers in the LPL. Just depends on how you want to end up ranking them. This is a big series for his all-pro hopes because he just outplayed Kanavi on every single front. Like, Kanavi was not good this series. Tian was amazing, and I think he was sick, and so this is just a ridiculous output. And is Cream like the best performing mid laner in the LPL right now? Can you actively name a mid laner who has been more consistent across this split than Cream has been? The glow up for him from essentially switching styles completely when you look at what he was at the beginning part of his career, the player that became a channel darling for me, assassin player, very, feast or famine, very Zeka-esque, very, Strive was another player who's kind of in that mold. He likes to play his melee carries, the Akali, and, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. He has completely switched up his game plan since coming over to Top Esports. Even before the marksman meta, he was someone that was playing a lot of marksman, but he was also willing to play Karma and a lot of these more passive mid lanes to just make sure the rest of his team was in comfortable spots. He's not always the guy who needs to take a ton of resources, but he has been so good 1v1, mechanically speaking, against everyone in the league that it really is a ridiculous thing to watch. He has become one of the most consistent mid laners in the world, and I just never expected to say that about Cream. I always thought he could get to being one of the better mids in the world, but to get there and be consistent about it, it's just crazy. It's a complete changing character, and I'm here for it. It really helps Top Esports. Jackie Love and Mako are obviously great. I've sang their praises a ton. Top Esports is just one of those teams that absolutely no one is going to want to run into. I think they're going to be favorites in almost any clash that they run into in the playoffs, and the fact that they're not one of the top 2 seeds is super dangerous for anyone else in the playoffs. So not good for them, but for JD Gaming, they end this Group A 4-4. Group Ascend, this did not go the way that I think that they wanted it to. Maybe they didn't expect to be dominant. Maybe they didn't expect to be number 1 or number 2 with how good BLG and Top Esports are, but they probably expected to be more competitive than this, and there are some real problems with this team. Sheer is going to get done of the series. His flaws are definitely starting to show. The last 2 weeks of this team have not been good, and specifically for Sheer in the top lane, the last 2 weeks have been really bad. So hopefully the pressure is not getting to him. The full-time starter job was finally given over to him after what felt like way too long, and the moment that happened, he started playing worse. And so hopefully the competition didn't breed his excellence. And hopefully that form that he ended up having for a lot of spring, the beginning of summer, ends up coming back, because this just was not good enough. But more importantly for me, Kanavi's got to start getting back on track. We've talked about JDG a ton over the course of this split. Ruler has been awesome. Kanavi was amazing at the beginning of this split. He was by far the best jungler in the LPL, was certainly in the conversation for best jungler in the world. But then again, you look at the last 2.5 weeks, it's not exactly worked out like that. Kanavi's performances have definitely started falling off. I think this team is worried about their ability to play AP junglers. I'm not worried about Kanavi's ability to play Zyra or Lilia or things like that. I am a bit worried about Yagao's ability to play things like Corki and Jace super regularly. They're just not really the things that he was very good at, at his best. I don't think this is a meta that suits Yagao all that well. We talked about that a ton last week, and he is really suffering because of that. But even at the beginning of the split, what we were saying about JD Gaming is that this is a 2v8 team. This is Kanavi and Ruler versus the world. When when they play well, they can beat anybody. When they don't play well, this team honestly isn't all that dangerous or all that good. And so it's a really weird dichotomy. If Kanavi's not going to be performing at a high level, this team could potentially be like a sleeper non-Worlds team if everything were to go wrong. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I would, kind of bet against that, but the fact that that option is on the table after everything that happened with JD Gaming last year just shows you how much of a mistake they made in the offseason getting rid of Knight. Like, at the end of the day, we can lock that in. I feel like that take has aged really well, and there's nothing else left to say. Yagao has not been the replacement that they were looking for, and this team is certainly in an interesting position. They're going to have to start stepping it up, because going into playoffs 500 is probably not what they were looking for. But for Top Esports, this is one of the most dangerous teams in the world. They already showed that at the Esports World Cup. Whether you want to take anything away from that or not, I certainly don't, but they've shown it more in the LPL regular season. I think this will be a team that genuinely competes to win the LPL, so long as the weird Top Esports choking curse doesn't end up coming into play. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL week number 5 overview and analysis video, and that's it for the regular season. We are done, we are dusted. It's time for the playoffs, or at least the play-ins. Up on the screen, how every single team has qualified for the playoffs. You'll notice no power rankings for any of the playoff teams here. As I said before, there's going to be a video out tomorrow that details all of that stuff. I'm going to go over every single one of the teams in the playoffs in depth, talking about what I think the strengths and the weaknesses and the play styles are. I'll break everything down for those of you who might not have been able to watch every single game or every single one of these videos. I'll break down exactly, how I think these teams might fare and what, I think could potentially throw them off in these series. And I will also do a full bracket prediction. So that's going to be coming tomorrow. That's where you're going to find out kind of technically where I power rank all of these teams in the context of their playoff run. Of course, the bottom 4, you can see those rankings. They're not going to change from last week. None of them played. Well, RNG played, but no changes there. They are done. Their year is over. EDG, Ultra Prime, WE, and RNG are out. So that's going to be the playoff bracket. Excited to go over that more tomorrow, but it is then time to get into my Player of the Week and my Dud of the Week for this shortened LPL week number 5. Player of the Week, pretty easy. It's got to go to Knight. He set the kill record in the LPL. Was this really ever going to go to anybody else? He basically got this for the game 2 against FPX, but even more so, he was really good across this week. You can only really point to that game 2 in their first series where it was like, the Yone didn't look perfect, but outside of that, he played 4 beautiful games, and it was a very easy choice for Player of the Week for me. And then my honorable mentions, my runner-ups, Wei, also from Bilibili, the only team to go 2-0 this week, definitely raises the stock of the players who ended up playing really well, and Wei has come in and honestly integrated himself into the team incredibly well and incredibly quickly. The team has shifted a lot around him, but hopefully this is them getting more consistent moving forward. And then Starry is going to get the other honorable mention here. The AD carry for OMG was awesome in a pretty important series to get that number 1 seed for Group Nirvana. So really nice series from Starry, really good summer split from Starry so far. Those are my 2 honorable mentions, but Knight is going to get my Player of the Week, and my Dud of the Week, it's going to go to Geju, the jungler for RNG. I don't really know what else to say other than I've seen about 3 weeks of tape from Geju, and it's been horrible. Like, he has looked unplayable at the LPL level. How much of that is RNG being a disaster, and how much of that is him just not being comfortable in pro play as somebody that was essentially plucked right out of solo queue? I don't know. Only time will tell on that. We'll see if he gets another opportunity next year, but his year is over with RNG being eliminated. He's going to get Dud of the Week for the final week here, and Knight will be getting Player of the Week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Like I said, we've got that LPL playoff primer video coming tomorrow. We also cover all 4 of the major regions, so LCS, LEC, LCK, here obviously in the LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.